Hello, and welcome to the Orbis Cascade Alliance's walkthrough tour of ArchivesSpace. This is Ava Gugamos from Pacific University. We're going to be looking at the navigation and some of the major features of ArchivesSpace version 1.5. So here we are in the staff portal of ArchivesSpace, and we're logged in on an account that has the highest level of user permissions, which is a system administrator role. We're doing that so that you can see all of the available options. Many of the more advanced functions that we'll see, though, aren't visible to users with lower level permissions. This bar here contains the tools that most users are going to want to use most often, including the Browse, Create, and Search functions. If we look under this Browse menu, we can see the different types of records that ArchivesSpace contains. The three that are on top, accessions, resources, and digital objects, are descriptive records. Resource records are really the key ones. Those are the master records for your archival collections. They're what generate EAD that you can export out to Archives West. Basically, a resource is an archival collection. They just call them resources in ArchivesSpace. But below the line here, we see records for controlled vocabularies, locations, events, and other functions. These records get linked to or associated with the descriptive records that are above the line. So for example, if you had a subject record, it could be linked or associated with multiple descriptive records. We're going to come back to this Create button in a little while. Let's just look at this Search button here. You can type in a term to search. Let me just put one in, something generic, records. Okay, so there we get the search results. There is an advanced search. As you can see, it's like a Boolean operator kind of search, but it doesn't have that many options for which fields you can search. Often browsing to one of these record types and then filtering, which is down here, works better. We'll come back to that a little later. This upper right-hand corner contains tools that pertain to your use of ArchivesSpace overall. So this is where you would choose, if your institution has multiple archival repositories, which one you wanted to work in. So for example, here at Pacific, we have a repository for the archives, for our art collection, for a museum. I'm going to stay in the archives for now. The System button is mostly going to be grayed out or invisible to users with lower level permissions. But this is where, if you're a sysadmin or another high-level user, you would have access to settings relating to managing your repositories and user records, and other system-wide settings. The little down arrow next to your username provides access to a limited number of preference settings. Which preferences you can choose to set, again, depends on your permission level. So not everyone would be able to set repository preferences, for example. The preferences under these menus are pretty limited. There's actually a lot more default settings that you can choose to set that are underneath the individual record types. Those settings can be made by high-level users. This bar here on the right reminds you which repository you're working in, and then the gear symbol gives you access to settings on the repository level. Once again, many of these preferences and tools are not available unless you have high-level permissions. This is also where you access any reports or background jobs that you may have initiated. Let's go back over to the Browse section. We'll take a look at what accession records look like. So clicking on this gives us a list of all the accession records that are currently in this repository. So just note that we're not seeing here our other repositories, the museum and art collections, just the archives. by clicking on one of these column headings, you can sort, and these column headings and which order they appear in, those can be chosen by your system administrator at the local level, though there are kind of a limited number of columns that you're allowed to choose. Over here on the left are various facets that you can limit by. Up here is where a sysadmin would edit the default values for accessions or download a CSV file for all of this that's appearing on the list. Over here, you can filter by text, and like I mentioned earlier, this is often a more efficient way to search. So let me just show you an example. Put in a name, Atia. Here we see the 69 accession records that relate to the word Atia. So at this point, we can either view or edit one of these records. If we view it, we will only see the fields that have actually been filled out. If we edit, then we see that many more fields are available. The navigation over here on the left-hand side lets you skip through the records, and it'll show you, or parts of the records rather, and this little number shows you where you actually have an entry. So I could skip all the way down to my user-defined fields, for example, and see that I have one in there. Now, you have the option when looking at descriptive records of various kinds, including accession records, to spawn new records off of them. What that means is you'll create a new record that pulls through metadata from your original record to create a new one so that you don't have to retype. So let's say that I wanted to spawn a new collection record or resource record off of this accession. I would be clicking this button here, Spawn Resource. And then, as you can see, it pulled through the metadata from that accession record to create a new resource record. Resource records basically have all of the sections that you would expect to see in an EAD file. This is handy because I didn't have to retype everything that I already wrote into the accession record. Now let's see what happens if we create a new blank resource record. You don't have to spawn records that way. You can start from scratch. So if I wanted to create a new resource record from scratch, I would go down to Create Resource. And you can see here is a new blank resource record, except that certain fields have been pre-populated. As the systems administrator, I was able to select what these pre-populated values were. Now, resource records are also where you enter hierarchical information about collections, like if you have a large record collection that has multiple series and files and so on. Resource records are where that kind of information goes. So let's open an existing resource record. Let me see here. Pick one. Here we go. This one has lots of series under it. And open it. And so you see this one at the top of the record has a component tree where it tells you this is the top level record on the collection. These are the various series, and then you can open them and you see underneath there are files. With each of these components, you can click and drag and move it around. You can create each of these components individually by adding a child or a sibling to the one that you're currently on. But there is also a more efficient tool for creating lots of different components rapidly, which is called the Rapid Data Entry tool. I'm not going to go into big detail about exactly how this works right now, but basically what it does is lets you make templates and then copy fields down. You can fill columns with sets of numbers and so on. And that really simplifies and makes it more efficient to do long lists of things like files within finding aids. It does get you away from doing things like creating folder lists in Excel and then having to merge them manually into your finding aids. Okay, so once you're done making a resource record, so let's say I was done with this one, how do you get the EAD out? Well, you go to the top level of your resource record, then you click on Export, and then download EAD. And it takes a minute for it to export. Let me see if this is ready yet. This is a relatively large collection, so it can take a minute or two just to generate that EAD. But here it is. So this is generic ArchivesSpace EAD. Just like we used to do with Archivist Toolkit, we do have to run this EAD through a transformer, which will take the generic code and put it into a form that's perfect for Archives West. That transformation tool is on the Archives West utility site. So just like the old process for Archivist Toolkit, you would take this file, make sure that it's named correctly, run it through the transformer, check it for errors, and then upload it to the site. And that is a basic tour of some of the major functions that we have in ArchivesSpace. We're going to be going into more detail about many of the record types, configurations, and other tasks in later recordings. Thank you very much for listening.